Key performance indicators. When you're using SSAS to crunch numbers, it can give you a lot of really good information. However, looking at all those numbers can almost make your head swim sometimes. Wouldn't it be nicer to have some kind of graphical representation, maybe a green traffic light or a red traffic light to tell you whether or not things are going good or bad? Well, that's exactly what a KPI is. It's a key performance indicator. It really just looks at specific metrics that you define and it tells you how you're doing. In this nugget, I'm going to show you how to create a simple KPI. The first one we'll deal with the sales quotas, and I'll show you how to set the value and the goal, and then you compare the value to the goal to give the status of how you're doing. You can even perform trending. That's where you're looking at where you are right now to times in the past. For example, if you want to look at where you were exactly a year ago or exactly a quarter ago, you can do things like that. Then the second thing I'll show you is how to create a parent KPI. Let's say that you have multiple simple KPIs and you want to create a weighted average of those. Well, you would create a parent KPI. And you would define which KPIs had which weighted values. Well, let's get started with a simple KPI. There will be times when you want to give a graphical representation of how your numbers are doing. For example, you might want to look at your actual sales numbers compared to your sales quota. And that's what we're going to do right now. I'd like you to look at your Cube Designer, and if you don't already have your sales amount quota, go ahead and add that by just right-clicking right here under New Measure and finding the Fact Sales Quota table. Now, if you're not finding that table, then of course you're going to have to add it to your view. Once you've added that sales amount quota, we want to make sure that we can browse the quota numbers by date. So what we can do is go to our Cube browser, and I'm just going to clear everything else out here. I'll also erase these two things up here, and I'll scroll up to where my measures are. There's my sales amount quota, and I want to organize this by order date. So maybe if I just drag this hierarchy over here, and you'll see that things are not appearing like we want them to. It looks like sales amount quota is the same across the board no matter what year it is. So remember the way we fix that? We simply go to our dimension usage, and here's where the order date intersects with the fact sales quota. So we want to create a relationship there. For the relationship, this is a regular relationship. As far as granularity, let's be real specific and specify date. And then the dimension columns and measure group columns are also going to be time key, so they match up. Now we hit OK. I'm going to deploy this and then refresh this in my browser, and we should see a difference in results. And here are our results. So that looks good. Next, we want to create a key performance indicator, so hit this fourth tab right here under KPI, and we're going to create a new KPI. Call this a meaningful name such as Sales Quotas. The associated measure group is Fact Sales Quota, and our value expression you can simply drag and drop. The value expression is the actual value, so that's the reseller sales amount, and our goal is our quota. So just drag that over there. Now as far as what's going to be graphically displayed, by default it will be a gauge. You have other options such as a traffic light or road sign, smiley face, but let's stick with the default of gauge. And then we have an expression that we can put in here. Let's move that over a little bit. So for my expression, I'm going to have a case statement. So I'll do something like case when the KPI value, and we feed it the name of our KPI. So if the value, which is what we just defined a second ago, divided by the KPI goal, if that's greater than or equal to 0.9, in other words, if we've hit 90% or above, then, and we're going to give a numeric value. The numeric value ranges from -1 to 1, 1 being the most positive. So then we can have another when clause. And I'm now going to give another range. For example, I can say when the KPI value is between 0.75 and 90, then 0. And then I'll give another range. For example, I might say when the KPI value, if one divided by the other, if it's between 0.5 and 0.75, then it will return negative 0.5. And then the default, we can say else -1. In other words, if it's below 0.5, it's really bad. And here's the end statement that matches up with the beginning case. So we can test this. By the way, there is another field here for trend. We'll get to that in a second. Let's go ahead and build this. And now if we want to look at this in our KPI browser, just hit this icon right next to it, and we'll hit the reconnect, and you'll see right here we have the actual value, and we have the goal, and our status, it's lukewarm. It was right there in the middle. We can scale things down as well. For example, if you want to look at just a specific order date, such as a specific year, you can say, well, if the year is equal to 2001, let's see how we did in 2001. Make sure you click somewhere on here to update the values. Looks like we did okay in 2001. Or if you want to look at 2002 and so on. Looks like we didn't fail miserably in any of those years. And like I said, if you wanted to narrow down to yet another, granularity like quarter or semester, you can do that. You can also perform trending. In other words, if you want to compare the values from this year compared to exactly a year ago, not a problem. Let's go back to our form view for the KPI, and we're going to scroll down to our trend indicator. And there's a special built-in MDX expression called parallel period. And parallel period takes several parameters. The first parameter is the granularity. For example, if you want to specify year, you can do that. The second parameter you provide is the number. So if you want to go back 1 year, you would feed it a value of 1. And then there's an optional third parameter. It defaults to the current date. Basically, you're specifying the date that you're comparing it to. So for our trend expression, we could have a case statement in here that says, first of all, let's say we're in the first available year, such as 2001. We don't have another year that we can compare it to, right? In other words, a parallel period year before 2001 is going to be empty. So let's address that issue right now. So we can say when is empty, and then we specify our parallel period, feeding it in the granularity. So in this case, it's going to be calendar year. So I'm going to go to my order date right here, go to my hierarchy. Here's my calendar year. I'll just drag it right there. And then the number 1 just means go back a year. If we wanted to go forwards, we would give it the -1. Then 0. 0 is neutral. Else 1. And then end. Now we're going to add some more to this right now, but right now our case statement is only addressing if there are no previous years. So let's go ahead and deploy it, and we'll look at it in our KPI browser here. Okay, so the trend, it's showing an up arrow, which means number 1. If we change this filter expression to say year 2001, and then change this, you'll see that the trend has changed. An arrow going to the side just means there was no change, or 0. So we know that that portion of our trending expression is correct. So now we can go back to our form and we can add to it. So let me scroll down here, and let's look at another scenario. We might say in here, when, and what we'd like to do is look at the KPI value of right now minus the KPI value of a year ago, take that value and divide by the KPI value of last year. And what that gives us is the percentage growth from year to year. So what we can do here is, once again, we'll put in here sales quotas. If this minus, we'll put this on the next line to make it a little easier to read, we're going to put inside of these parentheses an MDX expression, which is the intersection of the sales with the time frame of a year previous. So in here we'll say KPI value, sales quotas, followed by parallel period, and in here we'll have the calendar year. So let's just drag that expression over here, right there. And to specify 1 year ago, we put a 1 as an argument. Make sure to close off the parentheses. So we take that value divided by last year's values. So I'll just do some copy and paste here. So if the result of that division is greater than or equal to 0.01, in other words, if we had 1% growth or more, then 1, which means yes, we're okay, that's good growth. Else, and let's make anything else be a -1. In other words, if we did not have at least 1% growth, it's bad. Now, let's go ahead and deploy this and then test it out. Once it's finished deploying, go to your KPI browser, click in there, and we'll check out the trending here. You'll see that it was good in year 2003, and you can check out like maybe 2004 if you want to. And by the way, if you want to change it from 1% to something different, for example, you can always go back to this and say, you know what, I want to make it 5% growth. Well, then go down to your trending expression and change this to be 0.05. Now we'll browse this again. Make sure you hit reconnect. And then let's look at some of our other years. So you'll see that year 2001 once again is neutral because we didn't have a previous year to compare it to. And when we look at year 2002, growth was good there. And once again, you can filter this down as much as you want. Anytime you make changes up here, make sure you click somewhere in this area to update the values. If you go back to your form view right here and you scroll all the way down, you'll see that there's additional properties of your KPI. Notice here that you can specify a parent KPI. Well, for our case, nothing is appearing in this drop-down because we only have one KPI defined. But if we were to create a new KPI, we could specify that sales quota is our parent, or we could do the vice versa. We could make sales quota be a child of the parent. Before we use any of the advanced features here of KPI, I just want to simplify my sales quota a little bit. Let's look at our browser here for a second, and we'll just hit reconnect. Yes, we have some good values here. We have our value and our goal, and it tells us what the trend is, but wouldn't it be nicer, instead of having these raw values here, to instead give us a percentage? In other words, get the value divided by the goal, and then make our goal be something like X%, 90%, 20%, whatever. So let's change up our structure a little bit here. We'll go into our form view and we'll grab this value right here and we'll take the sales amount divided by the sales amount quota, and let's say that our goal is 90%, so 0.9. And then we can simplify our when clause. We can get rid of all of this. We can say case when our KPI value of sales quotas divided by the KPI goal of sales quotas. When that's greater than or equal to 0.9, then we're good. So then 1. Then we can say when, and we can just copy and paste right there. When that value is less than 0.5, then that's a bad thing, right? So we can say then -1. And anything in between is neutral, so we can say else 0. Oh yeah, and don't forget the end clause right there. And now let's go ahead and build this. And then we'll look at this in the browser, hit your reconnect, and you'll see there's our value and the goal. Now we have this little feature here called weight. That's only good if we have parent KPIs, and so that's what I want to show you right now. You can create a parent KPI that looks at various KPIs, and you can give some of the other KPIs weighted measures, and it will tell you, for example, the overall health. So for us to create a parent KPI, let's first of all create yet another child KPI. Maybe we'll call it profit margin. So to create our new KPI, we'll go here to our design mode, and I'll just click on here, new KPI. We'll call it profit margin. The associated measure group is the sales. And to calculate the profit margin, we simply take the sales amount, subtract from that the cost of the goods. So here's the total product cost. Let's put this in parentheses. And then we'll divide this by the cost of the sales. And let's make our goal for our profit margin be 3%. So our status indicator right down here, we can say case when the KPI value of the profit margin divided by the KPI goal of the profit margin if that is greater than or equal to 0.03, in other words 3%, then we're good. So we'll say then 1. Then we can have another case in here. We can say when, and we can just copy and paste right here, when that is less than 0.01, then -1, and anything in between is neutral, else 0. I'm going to make a quick change in here. I'm going to change that from 0.001 to just be 0.01, so that's 1%. Okay, we're also going to make sure that we have our end statement right there, so that looks good. We can scroll down a little bit further, and here's the trend expression. I find that the easiest way to do this is to go into the sales quotas right here, and find the trend expression there, and then copy it and tweak it. So I'm just going to take that and then go into the trending right here. And the only thing I'm going to change is I'm going to modify, I'm going to change sales quotas to be profit margin. Copy that and paste it right there. Everywhere where you see sales quotas. Okay, that looks great. And now we can go ahead and deploy it. Everything looks great there, so at this point we can click on our browser and we can hit reconnect, and you'll see now that we see things as far as percentages. Now what I'd like to do next is create a parent KPI to these guys right here, and I'm going to call the parent overall health. And maybe the sales quotas will have a weight of 2, whereas the profit margin will have a weight of 1. So really it's a two-step process. We have to define the KPI, and then we have to go into these children here and specify that they're a child of the parent. We also need to provide weights. Okay, so I'm going to go in to my profit margin right here. Let's click on there. Here's the profit margin. So I'm going to go into my design mode, and here's new KPI, and we'll call this overall health. The associated measure group is just going to be all, and then we put in a value expression. We can drag and drop, or we can just type it in verbatim if you know what it is. So what we can do here is just go to functions right here, and under KPI, you'll see that we have KPI value. You can just drag and drop, and inside there you have your string expression. So the expression that I want to grab is the sales quotas, and we're going to multiply that times the KPI weight. And the string that we're dealing with is, once again, sales quotas. Now let's put this whole expression here inside of parentheses. So this will be treated as one value. We want to take that and add to it the same thing for the profit margin. So copy and paste and change this to profit margin. Now we take, once again, this whole expression here. We added those two things together. Now we need to divide by 2 because we're getting the weighted average. Why divide by 2? Well, we've got two things in there, the sales quota and the profit margin. So we take that, that's our value expression. And for the goal expression, we're going to take the weighted average of our goals. You know, before we do anything else though, let's just make sure that we have our sales quotas and profit margin attributes set correctly. So if you click on sales quotas, scroll all the way down. If you don't see additional properties down here, just click on this little icon and it should drop down. For the parent KPI, make sure that it says overall health. For the weight, have that say 2. You can put a description in there if you want to. The current time member is just a default time member, so if you wanted to specify, for example, calendar year 2003, you can do that. I'm going to go to my profit margin. Scroll all the way down there. Once again, the parent KPI is overall health, and for here, my weight is 1. We can go back to our overall health. Let's build this. We'll modify the goal expression in just a moment. We'll go to our browser and hit reconnect, and you'll see here what the weighted average is. Now if you see that the value for the overall health ends up being 0 or blank, it probably means that you forgot to set the weight to one of those. If you forget to set the weight, then it defaults to 0, and 0 times any number is of course 0. Now as far as the overall health goal, all I do is take the weighted average of these two goals right here, which gives me 0.915. So I can go into my form design mode right there. Here's my goal expression, 0.915. You can also put in a status expression if you want to, and trending as well. You're not required to fill in all of these fields. Okay, so I'm just going to build this and deploy it, and then we'll look at it through our browser. Now keep in mind that you can have many more metrics in here than just profit margin and sales quotas. How would that affect the overall health? We'll just make sure that when you're performing your weighted average calculations, that let's say you have n number of these guys right down here, make sure that you divide by that same number so your values don't get skewed. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. We first of all talked about the reasons why we use a KPI. The main reason is to make things easier on the end user, so they can quickly glance and see how things are doing. We created a very simple KPI where we dragged and dropped the value. Remember how we went into our metadata and dragged over the sales revenue? Remember that you have that window there to help you drag and drop things over so you don't have to remember the syntax for everything. As far as the goal is concerned, you can either enter in an MDX expression or just a raw value such as 0.9 or 0.6. The status is going to be comparing the value to the goal. Usually you're going to be dividing the value by the goal. Remember that the value of the status expression needs to be in the range between -1, which is poor, and +1, which is the best. 0 being neutral. You can also use your trending. The trending is where you're comparing one time frame to a previous time frame, and so the most common function that we use there is parallel period. The value returned by the trending just gives us an indicator of how we did from one year to the other. And then the last thing we discussed were the parent KPIs. There's two things that you need to remember with your parent KPIs, is that you're going to be referencing the child KPIs, and you also need to make sure that you go back into the child KPI definitions, make sure that you specify what the parent KPI is, and also make sure that you give it a weighted measure. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.